If you've ever lived on a ranch, you know when something's off. It's in the air, the animals, the way the wind moves through the mesquite. You just know. I moved back to Cedar Ridge the week after my grandpa passed. He'd been the anchor of the family ranch since before I was born, and when cancer took him, it felt like someone had yanked the sun out of the sky. Grandma was lost without him, still cooking for two, setting his boots out by the door like he might need them. So I came home. I thought I'd be here a few months. Help her grieve, get the books in order, fix a few broken gates. But something kept pulling at me, like the land remembered me. And truth be told, I remembered it too. The early morning chill before sunrise. The sound of 100 hooves hitting the dirt in sync. I didn't just live here. I belonged here. First it was peaceful. Quiet days, honest work, just me, Grandma, and the dogs. Then Uncle David showed up. He hadn't been around much after Dad died in that tractor accident 10 years back. David was always slippery. Slick hair, manicured nails, and a suit that didn't fit the Texas heat. He talked like a politician and looked at the ranch like it was some untapped oil well. Just checking in on Mama, he'd said, pulling up in a rental car, not a speck of dust on him. And I hear you're playing cowgirl now, Victoria? I smiled politely, just keeping things running while Grandma finds her footing. He laughed, all teeth. That's cute. The first time I noticed something wrong, it was the water pump. Our south pasture troughs had gone dry overnight. I rode out and found the pipes twisted, clamps missing. Someone had deliberately tampered with it. The next week, 2 of our diesel tanks were bone dry. No sign of a leak, just drained. Then came the livestock mishap. Gates that were locked the night before mysteriously stood wide open in the morning. Cattle scattered down by the creek, 3 injured, 1 missing. Grandma blamed it on forgetfulness. Maybe I left it open, she said. I've been so distracted lately. But I wasn't buying it. Something didn't sit right. I started keeping a notebook. Times, dates, incidents. I didn't know what I was collecting, but I knew I'd need it later. Then came the buyers. Folks we'd worked with for years suddenly ghosted us. I ran into Tommy Hollis, our grain contractor, at the feed store. He avoided eye contact. Tommy, I said, stepping in front of him, you didn't return our calls. He looked guilty. Heard y'all are going under. That things are mismanaged. Don't want to get tangled in a foreclosure. My heart sank. That's not true. He just shook his head. People talk. I went home burning with questions. That night, I pulled up the ranch books. Orders, invoices, banking. And that's when I saw it. A contract signed with my grandmother's name, selling our hay crop to a company I'd never heard of, at half the market rate. Dated 2 weeks ago. I took the papers to Grandma the next morning, hands shaking. Did you sign this? She looked, blinked, then frowned. No. I've never heard of that outfit. My stomach turned. It's your signature. She stared at it long and hard. Well, maybe I did. I don't remember. I've been tired lately. That's when it started. The doubt. The fog. Her confidence in me. Eroding like riverbanks in flood season. One day I overheard her on the phone whispering, I don't know, David. She's always out late. I'm starting to wonder if she's taking money from the accounts. That broke me. I hadn't cried since Grandpa's funeral, but that night I sobbed into the hayloft like I was 10 years old again. Something was poisoning this place, turning Grandma against me, drying up our income. And no matter how hard I worked, things kept unraveling. And worst of all, I was starting to wonder if coming back was a mistake. The sabotage didn't stop. If anything, it got bolder. Our baler quit mid-row one afternoon. Belt slashed clean through like someone took a knife to it. One of the cattle feeders had its wires ripped out. That same week, a shipment of seed went missing. Not delayed. Not lost in transit. Just vanished. When I called the supplier, they told me the order had been canceled. By who? I asked. Lady gave your account number and name, the rep replied. Said y'all were switching crops. I hadn't canceled anything, but I didn't need a psychic to know who did. Uncle David. He started dropping by more often, suddenly helping out with business decisions he'd ignored for years. Always with a legal pad and some vague suggestion about streamlining the operation. Grandma, bless her, started taking his side more and more. Maybe David's right, she told me one morning while we were feeding the calves. You've got a big heart, but you're young. You've never run a business like this before. I stared at her, heart cracking in real time. Neither has he. She didn't answer. Just toss feed like she hadn't heard me. I started second-guessing myself. Every late bill. Every repair I couldn't make fast enough. I was running the ranch and losing the war. Alone. Sleep-deprived. Surrounded by ghosts of doubt. And then, like he was sent by fate or the last ounce of luck I had left, Mark showed up. He walked in like the past hadn't touched him. Suntanned, boots dusty, same crooked grin I remembered from 4th grade. We'd grown up together, side by side through church picnics, high school rodeos, and teenage heartbreak. Then he joined the military and disappeared into the world. I hadn't seen him in 7 years. I was elbow-deep in grease under the tractor hood when he called out from the gate. "This a bad time? Or can a cowboy get a glass of tea?" I damn near dropped the wrench. "Mark Evans?" I asked, wiping my hands on my jeans. "You come back from the dead?" "Just from Fort Hood," he said, stepping through the gate like no time had passed. "Heard the ranch needed saving." I laughed for the first time in weeks. "What gave you that idea?" He shrugged. "Small towns talk. And yours has been loud." We sat on the porch sipping tea while I unloaded everything. The broken equipment, the rumors, the forged contracts, even the tension with Grandma. He didn't flinch. Instead, he pulled out his phone and said, "Let's start digging." That night, we walked the perimeter of the barn and spotted the first camera. One of those cheap solar-powered trail cams, hidden up in the rafters, pointing toward the fuel tanks. 2 more near the equipment shed. I hadn't put them there. But they'd been catching someone. And the next day, when we checked the memory cards, we found him. David. At 2:16 a.m., yanking the wiring from the baler. Another clip. David unlocking the gate with a key he wasn't supposed to have, letting the cattle roam. And then came the smoking gun. David holding a clipboard, handing a folder to a man I recognized as the rep from a known grain reseller. The kind who'd buy your crops at rock-bottom prices and flip them for triple the profit. I stared at the screen in stunned silence. "He's selling us out." Mark nodded grimly. "And with your grandma thinking you're the problem, he's lining himself up to take over when she's had enough." "But how?" I asked. "Why would she trust him?" Mark pointed to the papers I'd saved, contracts, banking statements, even the one with Grandma's forged signature. "Because he's feeding her just enough lies and fake evidence to make you look incompetent. He's creating the mess, then blaming you for the fallout." I felt cold all over. "This is criminal." "Then it's time we treated it like a crime," Mark said. That was the turning point. We weren't guessing anymore. We were building a case. Mark wasn't just a pretty face and a cowboy drawl. He had served 6 years in Army intelligence. Once he saw the scale of what David was doing, he switched into full recon mode. "We need to treat this like a battlefield," he told me, flipping open a spiral notebook. "Your uncle is operating under 3 assumptions: that no one's watching, no one cares, and no one can prove a damn thing." By the end of the week, we had turned Grandma's sewing room into a war room. Maps of the property, printouts of contracts, screenshots from the cameras, handwritten logs of every lie, every deal, every missing asset. Mark made me feel like I wasn't crazy, like the world was finally snapping into focus. We visited the local bank and got a copy of every statement from the last 6 months. I hadn't looked that deep before, mostly because Grandma handled the finances, until David offered to help during her grief. I could hardly believe what we found. Multiple transfers from the ranch account to a Shell LLC in Houston. The LLC's name? DLR Holdings. David Leonard Richards. The ego on that man. It got worse. We found a $30,000 equipment purchase that never showed up, a $15,000 payment labeled consulting, and Grandma's signature on a wire authorization $4.10,000, dated the same day she was in the hospital for a blood pressure episode. There was no way she signed anything that day. Mark muttered, "Forgery. Texas Penal Code Section 32.21. That's prison time." We took a drive out to the sheriff's office in Blanco County. We weren't sure what to expect, but luckily the deputy on duty, Jesse McCrae, used to work cattle with my dad before joining law enforcement. He took one look at the documents and sat back in his chair. "Victoria, This ain't just a family squabble. This is criminal mischief. Contract fraud. Possibly attempted unlawful transfer of property under fraudulent inducement. He agreed to open a file and keep the info confidential. But you're gonna need to bring this to a lawyer, he warned. This smells like a property grab. That night, Mark and I sat on the tailgate of his truck under the stars, dead quiet. Then he said, "What are you gonna do when this blows up the family?" I didn't answer right away. The cicadas filled the silence. Finally, I said, "I already lost them the day Grandma looked me in the eye and asked if I was stealing from her." He nodded. "Then let's take back what's yours." We scheduled a meeting with an estate attorney in Austin, someone Grandma had used years back for land rights stuff. Her name was Pamela Keyes, and the moment she saw our evidence, her demeanor changed. "Your uncle is setting himself up to claim this land by discrediting you and exhausting your grandmother," she said bluntly. "This is classic fraudulent inducement. If he's acting under a false power of attorney or forging anything, we can hit him on multiple fronts." She made copies of everything and said, "We're going to court." As we left her office, I felt it. Not just hope. Righteous fire. David had started a war. He just didn't know the land he was trying to steal was protected by someone who'd bury him under the very soil he tried to claim. The day we served David was the day everything cracked open. Pamela, our lawyer, had the lawsuit filed with Blanco County Court under 4 charges: forgery under Texas Penal Code Section 32.21, criminal mischief for the equipment sabotage, fraudulent inducement regarding the bogus contracts, and attempted unlawful transfer of property because, surprise, David had filed a preliminary petition to move the ranch's title into a trust he controlled, citing declining cognitive function. And Grandma, that was the final straw. He wasn't just trying to steal the land. He was trying to have her declared unfit. We didn't tell Grandma at first. Not until Pamela insisted she come into the office to review her own signature on 3 different contracts David had convinced her she'd approved. She stared at them in silence. Then her hand began to shake. "I never signed these," she whispered. David said they were just routine paperwork. Maintenance releases, he called them. Pamela leaned forward. "He also submitted a declaration that you're mentally unfit to manage your estate." The air left the room. "My own son," Grandma said. "Trying to put me in a home just so he can run the land like a damn theme park." Mark squeezed my hand under the table. I hadn't realized I was gripping the chair so hard my knuckles were white. To her credit, Grandma didn't cry. She just sat straighter in her chair and said, "He's not taking 1 inch of my land." 3 days later, the papers were served. David showed up to the ranch in a blazer like it was a funeral, barking at me across the yard. "You think this is going to stick? You're just pissed because you don't know how to run things." I didn't say a word. Grandma stepped out onto the porch in her house dress and snapped, "You come here again and I'll feed your bones to the coyotes." David turned beet red. "Mama." "No," she snapped, that steel tone I hadn't heard since I was 12 and got caught sneaking a beer from the barn fridge. "You forged my name. You drained our accounts. You sabotaged the ranch your brother died working on. You're no son of mine." That hit harder than any legal notice. David sputtered something about slander and taking this to the state court, then stomped off, tires kicking up gravel as he peeled out. The next month was a blur of depositions, hearings, and discovery. Pamela made sure every document we submitted painted a trail of deceit so clear, even a jury of ranch dogs could convict him. The local paper caught wind of it. Headline: Family Feud Turns Legal, Ranch Heiress Fights Back. I hated the attention. But part of me wanted the world to know I hadn't abandoned this land. I was fighting for it. One day in court, the judge asked David's lawyer, "How did your client come to believe he had authority to act on behalf of the plaintiff?" The lawyer stammered. Mr. Richards was under the impression he had verbal permission. From a grieving widow in her 70s, the judge interrupted. Convenient. David sat stone-faced at the table, jaw tight, sweating through his collar. By the time the trial ended, the evidence was undeniable. The court found David guilty of forgery, fraudulent contract manipulation, criminal mischief, and attempted unlawful seizure of property. Pamela made sure the sentence hit where it hurt: restitution, a restraining order from the ranch, and a lien against his properties to repay what he'd stolen. He didn't go to prison, but he lost everything else. And I got it back. All of it. The morning after the verdict, I woke up to the sound of quiet. No barking, no metal clanking, no whispered accusations drifting down the hallway. Just a still Texas sunrise, golden and unapologetic, spilling through my window. Mark was already outside, tossing hay to the cattle like he'd always been part of the rhythm. I stood on the porch for a while just watching him, the way his shoulders moved steady and certain. I hadn't realized how much fear had lived in my bones the last few months until it wasn't there anymore. Grandma was at the kitchen table, her coffee cup warming her hands instead of trembling in them. She looked up at me and smiled. Not that tight, polite smile she'd worn since Grandpa passed. This one was real. "You saved this place," she said softly. I sat down across from her. "We both did." She reached over, placing her hand on mine. I should have seen what David was doing. I wanted so bad to believe he just wanted to help. "I know," I said. "He made it easy to doubt me. That's what manipulators do." She looked out the window, watching the wind push the oak leaves sideways. "Your daddy would be proud of how you handled it, of who you are." That one hit me right in the chest. I hadn't let myself think about Dad much during the fight. Grief can get messy when you're trying to stay strong. But I felt him in the soil, in the fence posts I'd mended, in every hard decision I'd made to protect what he loved. Later that week, Mark and I rode the property line just to see it. The fields were starting to come alive again. Contracts were back in place, this time fair and legit. Suppliers had returned. One even called to apologize for believing the rumors. We passed the north pasture, where Grandpa used to say the soil was just a little mean, rocky, dry, and too stubborn to grow anything easy. But it always surprised you come spring. Kind of like me, I guess. Mark pulled his horse up beside mine and said, "So what now, cowgirl?" I thought about that. About the land, the sweat, the legal fees, the nights I wanted to pack a bag and disappear. And I smiled. Now we build. We planted winter rye that fall, fenced the outer pasture, repaired the busted irrigation system. Bit by bit, the ranch came back to life. Not in spite of the storm, but because we weathered it. Mark stayed. At first just for a few weeks to help with the work. But the way his boots stayed by the back door and his coffee mug claimed a permanent spot in the cabinet told a different story. One night, under the stars, he said, "You ever think we'd end up back here? You, me, and a mess of cattle." I grinned. "Not like this. But I'm not mad about it." He kissed me then, and it felt like something that had waited its turn. Word spreads fast in small-town Texas, especially when it involves land, lawsuits, or betrayal. So once the dust settled on David's very public fall from grace, the vultures came sniffing. Former friends of his, old business contacts, shady land brokers offering to take the burden of the ranch off our hands. One guy in a too-tight blazer and cowboy boots that had never seen mud showed up in a new Ford King ranch and said, "Victoria, you're young. This is a lot for someone your age. We'd offer top market, plus bonuses if you sign before winter." I looked him dead in the eye and said, "You offering to buy my lungs too? 'Cause I'd survive just about as well without those as I would without this ranch." He blinked. "I just meant." "I know what you meant," I said and closed the door. They didn't understand. None of them did. This land wasn't for sale. Not because it was profitable, hell, ranching rarely is. Not because of ego or pride or spite. Because it was legacy. Blood, sweat, and generations poured into soil that never gave anything away for free. David underestimated that. He thought I'd fold, walk away, beg for peace. He didn't know that when you try to gut a woman's foundation, she doesn't crumble. She rebuilds in stone. Mark found new clients through friends in Austin. People looking for pasture-raised beef, organic feed, the whole deal. We leaned in. Started labeling everything under our own name. Richards Ridge Ranch. Reclaimed the family name from David's wreckage. Funny thing happened once we stopped chasing the approval of old networks. New ones opened up. Buyers who respected us. Neighbors who pitched in without asking. Even the sheriff dropped by one day with his hat in hand and said, "I knew something was off. I just didn't realize how deep." "It was deep enough to bury us," I told him. But we climbed out. The best revenge wasn't the court case. It wasn't David's financial ruin or the forfeiture of his land speculation company, which dissolved 6 weeks after the ruling. No, the best revenge was this. Sunrise over our ridge, cattle lowing in the field, Grandma humming while making biscuits again, and Mark's jacket hanging next to mine like it always belonged there. And knowing that no matter how hard he tried, David didn't win. He never even came close. It had been a few quiet months since the court decision, long enough for the grass to grow back over the tire tracks David had left behind. Then like clockwork he came slithering back. Not to the ranch, he knew better, but to the courthouse, filing a motion to appeal the ruling. He claimed emotional duress, coercion, and my personal favorite, familial gaslighting. Pamela called me the second she saw the paperwork. He's throwing spaghetti at the wall, hoping something sticks. Does he have a lawyer? He's representing himself. That made me laugh. David in a courtroom without a handler was like a rooster trying to play poker. All bluff, no feathers. The judge tossed his motion out within 2 weeks. Lack of standing, lack of evidence, and lack of basic understanding of civil procedure, the ruling said. Not even a hearing. Just a polite judicial slap to the face. But David's antics stirred up the waters again. One morning I caught Grandma staring at her coffee cup a little too long. She hadn't said David's name since the trial. But I knew the silence didn't mean peace. It meant something was bubbling under. He was a sweet boy once, she said. Used to bring me wildflowers in a peanut butter jar. I sat down across from her. Sweet boys don't try to have their mothers declared incompetent for a deed title. She nodded slowly. I know. I just keep wondering, how did he get so twisted? I didn't have an answer. Maybe he was always like that and grief just gave him a reason to let it out. Or maybe some men think inheritance is owed to them like oxygen. But whatever the cause, the result was the same. He'd lost the only family who still cared enough to give him chances. And in doing so he'd made sure the ranch would never pass through his hands. That night, Mark and I went through the final estate paperwork with Pamela. We'd officially restructured the ownership into a family trust with me and Grandma as co-trustees. David's name was nowhere. Not even in the footnotes. Pamela raised her glass of sweet tea. To clean records and clean slates. Mark clinked his against mine. And to snakes that slither away and never come back. We laughed. But I knew better. Snakes always come back. You just keep the grass short so you see 'em coming. It showed up tucked between the electric bill and a Tractor Supply catalog. A plain white envelope. No return address. My name scrawled across the front in that jittery, slanted script I hadn't seen since childhood. David's handwriting. I stood in the kitchen, the dogs at my feet, sunlight creeping across the tile, and just stared at it. Half of me wanted to toss it straight into the wood stove. The other half? That half wanted to see what a man says after trying to ruin your life. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of line paper. No greeting. No apology. Just this. You think you won. But I only did what I had to do. That ranch was never meant to be yours. You don't understand what it takes to make it survive. Grandpa coddled you. And now you'll bleed yourself dry trying to live up to a ghost. When this all falls apart, and it will, I hope you remember that I tried to save it from you. D. I read it twice, then once more out loud, just to feel how small his voice sounded when stripped of all his noise. I handed the letter to Grandma. She read it, shook her head, and said, Your uncle's biggest problem is that he thinks ownership is the same thing as legacy. Mark wanted to burn it. Let him eat the ashes of his own ego, he joked. But I kept it. I slipped it into a manila folder labeled David, Closure, and filed it in the old metal cabinet by the pantry, next to the court transcripts and photos we'd used in the trial. Not because I needed a reminder, but because history deserves receipts. A week later, we heard he'd moved 2 towns over, working part-time at a used car dealership. A far cry from the mogul he imagined himself to be. I didn't feel sorry for him. Not even a flicker. Because here's the truth, David didn't lose the ranch because he wasn't good enough. He lost it because he tried to take it by force, by lies, by erasing the hands that held it before him. And the land doesn't forget who walks it with respect, and who tries to conquer it. It happened just after New Year's, cold, dry, and wind-whipped. I was brushing down the horses when I caught the faintest whiff of smoke. Not chimney smoke. Wild smoke. Sharp and accurate, like something not meant to burn was burning. Mark came running from the tool shed, face grim. Was fence line. Fire. We saddled up fast, grabbed the extinguishers we kept on the ATVs, and tore down the trail. Flames were already licking at the underbrush, low but moving fast with the wind behind them. By some miracle it hadn't reached the pasture yet. If it had hit the hay barn, we'd have lost everything. It took 2 hours, 3 neighbors, a dozen buckets, and an improvised fire break cut through the brush with the tractor, but we stopped it. Barely. Once the adrenaline wore off and the smoke settled into our clothes and skin, I walked the fire line. That's when I saw it, an empty gas can kicked under a cedar tree. Still warm. Not lightning. Not a careless cigarette. Arson. I took a photo, called Deputy McCrae, and watched his face tighten as he picked it up with gloved hands. I'll send it to the lab, he said. But I can already tell you, this wasn't no accident. He didn't say David's name. He didn't have to. But unlike before, I wasn't scared. I was furious. You think he's that stupid? I asked. No, Jesse said. But desperate men make dumb choices. In the end, they couldn't prove it was David. No prints. No witnesses. Just a trail of smoke and a lot of bad blood. But whether it was him or someone he sent, it didn't matter. Because the ranch was still standing. The fences were scorched but not broken. The hay barn, unharmed. And me? Fire tested. The very next day, I bought 3 new trail cameras, upgraded the alarm system, and installed motion lights across every inch of the west side. Mark raised an eyebrow. You expecting another visit? I shrugged. No. But I don't expect rain not to fall either. We didn't just rebuild that month, we fortified. Fireproofing, insurance audits, backup generators. Every weak spot became a wall. David tried to burn the past. But all he did was forge the future. The spring after the fire was the greenest we'd had in years. The rains came slow and steady, not the flash floods we dreaded. The ryegrass sprouted high, the calves fattened early, and every morning smelled like second chances. Grandma started walking the property again. Not far, just down the gravel path and back, cane in hand and the dogs circling her ankles like they remembered who really ran this place. She'd stop by the cattle pens and mutter to herself like she was taking inventory of the souls who stayed loyal. One morning she turned to me and said, "You know what your grandfather used to say?" I smiled. "Plenty." He talked more than a Baptist preacher. She chuckled. He said, "You don't inherit the land. You borrow it from the ones who'll come next." I nodded. Then I guess we better take good care of it. That spring we hosted our first community branding day. Neighbors, friends, local kids looking to learn. Mark handled the ropes, I ran the chutes, and Grandma sat in a lawn chair sipping sweet tea, yelling advice like she was still 30. One of the boys, maybe 12, asked me, "Did you always know this ranch would be yours?" I paused. No. But I always knew I'd fight for it. David never showed his face again. Last I heard, he'd moved to Oklahoma, trying to start some real estate thing with oil money that wasn't his. Good luck with that. We never pressed charges for the fire. Not because we didn't want to, but because some things don't need courts to settle. The land keeps score. And I figure it already has. The ranch runs clean now. Not perfect, we've still got busted gates, ornery bulls, and droughts that test your faith. But there's no more poison in the well. No more rot in the ledger. Just work. Honest, back-breaking, heart-healing work. Sometimes I wake up before dawn, sit on the porch with Mark and just listen. To the coyotes. To the wind. To the rhythm of a place that nearly got taken from me. And I think about what I learned. Justice doesn't always ride in like a sheriff with a badge. Sometimes it's slower. Grittier. More personal. But when it comes, when you claw it back with your bare hands and spit in the face of the ones who doubted you, it tastes better than any revenge you could ever plan. So here's what I know now. Family isn't blood. It's who shows up when the fire comes. Legacy isn't what you're handed. It's what you protect. And strength? It's not loud. It's quiet. It's waking up every day and saying, "You can try to take it from me. But you won't. Because I'm Victoria Richards. And this ranch remembers who stood tall, and who tried to steal it."